Snow presses against the quiet streets of Maplewood when an aging German shepherd, once a proud military canine, staggers into view. His ribs show beneath a battered coat, his paws bleed onto the frozen pavement, yet he keeps walking because someone threw him away, someone who feared the secrets he carried. Across town, inside a lonely blue house, a widowed man named Elias Monroe heats his first cup of morning coffee, unaware that fate is dragging a miracle straight to his door. A forgotten animal, a grieving soul, and a danger that watches from a white truck idling just beyond the maple trees. One moment is all it takes for their lives to collide, and what happens next will make you believe that God still sends help in fur and silence, and that broken hearts can find their way home again. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no abandoned dog or hurting human should ever face the storm alone, hit subscribe and share this story with someone who needs hope today. Winter settled over Maplewood, Oregon, the way fog settles over an abandoned dock. Quiet at first, then all at once. The town sat between a restless strip of coastline and a thick line of evergreen forest. On most days, the wind carried the smell of salt and pine, but tonight it carried only cold. Sharp, wet, insistent cold that slid under doors and pressed against windows until even warm houses felt smaller. Maplewood Street was nearly empty. Porch lights glowed behind curtains of rain, and the pavement shone like a dark mirror. The storm had not reached its worst, but it had already turned the neighborhood into a place of hunched shoulders and hurried steps. Anyone outside moved quickly. Anyone without shelter struggled. Harbor walked in that storm. He was an aging German shepherd, large but thin, his coat mottled with the uneven grays of a body worn by work rather than time. Years ago, his fur had been clean-cut black and tan. Now it clung in wet patches, showing ribs along his sides. His muzzle was dusted with white, and one ear bent at the tip, an old injury never properly treated. His right hind leg stiffened whenever he stepped, a reminder of a job he once performed without hesitation. Harbor had served with the Marine Reconnaissance Division as a canine unit. He had tracked explosives, followed trails through collapsed streets, and slept beside men who trusted him more than they trusted their own gear. His handler, Staff Sergeant Nolan Briggs, had been a tall, solid man with a dependable calm. Harbor had worked best under Briggs's voice, steady, low, certain. But Briggs was gone now. A roadside blast had taken him during a routine sweep. Harbor had survived, though survival was a loose term for a dog who had lost the one command he understood best: stay with me. After Briggs's death, Harbor was classified as retired. A new officer processed the paperwork quickly, with more efficiency than empathy. The dog was listed as non-essential, then loaded into a truck and driven away from base. The drop-off was abrupt. Harbor was pushed out near Maplewood's outskirts, the door slammed, and the vehicle disappeared into the rain. He had been alone since. Tonight marked his 7th day wandering Maplewood's narrow blocks. Hunger slowed his steps. Rain weighed on his back. His eyes, still alert but dulled by exhaustion, watched cars pass without slowing. He found temporary shelter under porches or beside dumpsters, always moving when the cold became too sharp. Harbor paused beneath a flickering street lamp. Its light buzzed against the damp air, illuminating the fog around him in a faint halo. He sniffed at a scrap of paper drifting across the sidewalk, but found no food. He continued limping along the row of houses, each window glowing with silhouettes of people he didn't know and routines he had never belonged to. At number 39 lived Mabel Kensington, a thin woman with a tightly pinned bun and a wardrobe of beige sweaters. She often sat near her front window, knitting with quick, practiced hands. When Harbor wandered too close earlier that week, she had tapped her cane on the steps to keep him away. She wasn't unkind, just cautious. "Not here, dog," she had murmured. Harbor had stepped back, obedient as ever. Farther down the street stood number 43, a house with peeling blue paint and a sagging gutter. Despite its worn exterior, it held a solid presence, as though it had weathered more winters than the neighborhood combined. The porch light glowed dimly but consistently, refusing to surrender to the storm. Inside was Elias Monroe. Elias was 62, tall but slightly stooped from years of working aboard naval vessels. His frame remained broad, though softened by age. A neatly trimmed gray beard framed a face marked by deep-set lines, some from sun exposure, others from nights spent awake longer than necessary. His hair, mostly silver, was combed back in a habit that had survived decades of military routine. Elias had once been known for steadiness, both in judgment and in crisis. As a naval engineer, he had been the person others relied on when machinery failed or danger approached. But a boating accident 3 years earlier had taken his wife, Nadine, and their daughter, Lark. After that, the steadiness had turned inward. He spoke less, smiled less, fit into the world less. Now he lived alone, working on small repair jobs for neighbors and avoiding anything that felt too much like living. On this night, Elias stood at his living room window, holding a mug of black coffee. Through the curtain, he saw Harbor moving slowly along the street, rain thickening along the dog's back. It wasn't the first time he'd seen him. The dog had been returning to the same abandoned porch across the road, an old yellow house with boarded windows. The pattern was easy to notice for someone who spent his evenings watching more than speaking. Elias watched Harbor pause at the edge of his property. The dog's chest rose and fell quickly, each breath visible in the cold air. Something about the animal's posture, a mix of discipline and weariness, struck Elias as painfully familiar. He set down his mug and walked into the kitchen. His house was tidy, arranged with the practicality of someone who once lived in cramped ship quarters. He opened his refrigerator and found a container of homemade chicken soup. Without thinking too long about the strangeness of the moment, he poured some into a small pot and warmed it. The steam filled the kitchen with a simple, grounding smell. When the soup was ready, Elias carried the bowl to the porch. The wind stung his cheeks. Rain swept across the wooden boards, forcing him to shield the bowl with his hand. He placed it on the top step and retreated back a short distance, standing near the door but not blocking the view. Across the street, Harbor lifted his head. The scent reached him slowly, cutting through the rain and the ache in his stomach. He hesitated, body tense with the instinctive caution of a dog whose trust had been mishandled too often. The porch light from number 43 shone across the pavement, creating a faint path of warmth through the cold. Harbor stepped forward. His limp was more noticeable now, each movement careful, measured. He climbed the step, lowered his muzzle, and began to eat. He swallowed quietly, as though afraid the sound might cause the food to vanish. Elias remained still, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. He did not speak or reach out. The dog had survived long enough to understand the difference between attention and intrusion. When Harbor finished, he took a slow step back and looked at Elias. Not with eager expectation or fear, just acknowledgement. A simple recognition between two creatures who had run out of places to go. Elias nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Then he stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. Harbor returned to the vacant porch across the street. He circled twice before settling beneath the overhang, tucking his body against the rough wooden boards. The storm continued its steady attack on Maplewood, but under that broken porch, Harbor closed his eyes. For the first time in many nights, he did not lay awake. The street lamp above flickered once more, but held firm, casting a soft, steady light over him. The storm eased overnight, but Maplewood woke to a cold that felt sharper for its quietness. The sky hung low, pale enough that it almost blended with the gray sea in the distance. Trees dripped from the aftermath of rain, and the streetlights clicked off one by one as dawn crept in. Maplewood Street looked the same as it always had, weathered, practical, surviving, but something had shifted beneath that veneer. Elias Monroe felt it before he understood it. He stepped out onto his porch early that morning, coffee in hand, wearing the same navy sweater he'd had for years. The cuffs were frayed, but he liked the weight of it, the familiarity. He surveyed the street the way some people checked the news, quietly, habitually. Harbor's shape was still visible under the abandoned porch across the road. The dog lay curled close to the ground, head resting on his paws. A thin vapor of breath rose from his muzzle, disappearing into the cold air. He wasn't shivering anymore, which relieved Elias more than he cared to admit. Elias set the coffee down and walked to the edge of his porch. The boards creaked a bit, an old, predictable sound. He crossed his arms against the cold and watched Harbor for a long moment. He had seen animals take shelter on Maplewood Street before, cats under stairwells, raccoons tipping over trash bins. But something about Harbor felt different. Not just because the dog looked like he'd lived a lifetime before arriving here, not just because he'd approached the soup so cautiously last night. There was something in the way Harbor observed his surroundings, alert even in exhaustion, that hinted at a past built on order and routine. Across the street, a door opened at number 41. A man stepped out and locked the door behind him before heading toward his truck. Elias recognized him, Calvin Hawthorne, a local electrician in his late 40s. Calvin had a square jaw softened by a week's worth of stubble, sandy brown hair that curled slightly when damp, and the kind of posture that suggested he'd spent most of his life climbing ladders or crawling under houses. His jacket bore his business logo, Hawthorne Wiring Company, stitched in faded white thread. Calvin paused on his driveway when he spotted Harbor beneath the abandoned porch. He frowned, adjusting the strap of his tool bag. "That the same dog from yesterday?" he asked, raising his voice just enough for Elias to hear. "Looks like it," Elias replied. Calvin shook his head. "Sad sight. Poor thing's skin and bones. Might be dangerous, though. Some strays get unpredictable." Elias considered that. Harbor had shown no aggression last night. No barking, no growling, just hunger and exhaustion. "He doesn't seem dangerous," Elias said. Calvin shrugged, the kind of shrug that carried little judgment but plenty of resignation. "If he sticks around, animal control might show up. They don't give strays much time." He opened the truck door and tossed in his gear. "Be careful, Eli." Elias nodded, though something inside him bristled at the implication. Calvin drove off, leaving the street quiet except for the distant cry of a gull riding the morning breeze. Elias walked back inside, poured another cup of coffee, and noticed how empty the house sounded. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of pipes settling, small noises that used to drown beneath conversation, footsteps, laughter. He shook off the thought, grabbed a leftover biscuit from the previous night's dinner, and stepped outside again. Harbor lifted his head when Elias approached. His ears twitched, one folding slightly at the tip. His eyes, though tired, were focused. Elias crouched near the curb, leaving plenty of space. He placed the biscuit on the pavement and nudged it slightly closer with one finger. "This is all I've got right now," Elias said quietly. He wasn't expecting the dog to understand the words, but speaking them felt natural. The dog seemed to listen in the way creatures do, not to the meaning, but to the intention. After a moment of hesitation, Harbor rose slowly, limping toward the food. He lowered his muzzle and ate, carefully, almost politely. Elias noticed the scars on the dog's legs, thin lines of old stitches, rough patches of healed burns, not the kind of injuries a stray picked up on the streets. These were marks of work, danger, service. "You've seen things," Elias murmured. "More than I have, maybe." As Harbor finished, a voice called out from farther down the street, "Morning, Mr. Monroe." Elias stood. A teenage girl approached, bundled in a thick maroon jacket with gloves to match. Her name was Lila Pena, around 15 or 16, with dark curls pulled into a loose ponytail and bright, curious eyes. She lived with her grandmother in the small two-story house at the end of Maplewood Street. Lila was friendly, talkative, and had a habit of noticing anything out of place, which meant she had already noticed Harbor. "That's a big dog," she said, keeping a respectful distance. "Is he yours?" "No," Elias replied. "Just passing through, I think." "He looks tired." Her voice softened with an instinctive compassion. "Like he hasn't slept in a real bed in forever." Elias managed a faint smile. "I think you're right." Lila studied Harbor a little longer, then looked up at Elias with the kind of straightforward sincerity only teenagers have. "He trusts you." Elias shook his head. "I doubt that." "It's true," she insisted. "Some animals just know who's safe." The comment caught Elias off guard. He didn't know what to do with it, so he nodded instead. "You should get to school before the buses fill up." She waved and hurried on, leaving Elias with a strange mix of warmth and discomfort. He wasn't used to being seen, especially not in ways he didn't expect. The morning wore on. Elias spent most of it repairing a broken drawer in his kitchen, though every few minutes he found himself glancing outside. Harbor stayed curled under the abandoned porch, eyes half closed, but alert enough to follow movement on the street. The dog watched joggers pass, listened to the mail truck, tracked every sound with a disciplined steadiness. Around noon, the sky darkened again. Another rain band approached. Maplewood's storms often moved in clusters, and this one appeared heavier than the last. By the time droplets began striking the sidewalk, Harbor was already shifting, bracing himself for another cold night. Elias sighed. He put on his coat, stepped outside, and crossed the street. Harbor lifted his head but didn't move. Elias crouched. "You can't stay out here tonight," he said softly. "Not in this storm." Harbor blinked slowly, uncertain. Elias hesitated. He wasn't impulsive by nature, and he rarely invited anyone, human or otherwise, into his space. But the rain was falling harder now, pelting the abandoned porch like thrown gravel. Harbor, old and worn and alone, wouldn't last long in another downpour. Elias reached into his pocket and retrieved a piece of jerky he kept for hiking trips. He held it out, steady and patient. Harbor sniffed the air, shuffled forward, and took it gently from Elias's hand. "There you go," Elias whispered. "Come on." He rose slowly, giving the dog space. Harbor hesitated only once before following, limping, cautious, but willing. They crossed Maplewood Street together, the rain thickening around them. Elias opened his front door and stepped aside. Harbor looked up at him, then into the warm glow of the house. After several long seconds, he stepped inside. Just as Elias closed the door, the rain intensified, hammering the porch with relentless force. Maplewood Street vanished into gray, but inside the quiet blue house at number 43, a small beginning took shape between a lonely man and a weary dog. Two lives shifted slightly back toward the warmth they had long forgotten. Harbor hesitated only a few steps inside the doorway before stopping. The warmth of the house met him like a foreign current, gentle, steady, unfamiliar. His paws rested on the entry mat, leaving small wet prints that stretched behind him like a trail of caution. Elias Monroe stood nearby, coat dripping, watching the dog with a mixture of uncertainty and responsibility. He had invited Harbor in on instinct, moved by the battering rain and the sight of an old creature bracing himself against another storm. But now, in the calm interior of his home, Elias felt the weight of what he had done. He hadn't let another living being cross this threshold in years. The entryway was narrow, lined with practical wooden hooks and a shelf of worn boots. Harbor sniffed the air. He smelled dust, old pine, metal from the toolbox near the corner, and something else beneath it all, the faint trace of a life once lived here. Elias stepped aside to give him room, placing his wet coat on the hook. "It's just a house," Elias said quietly, as if the dog needed reassurance. "You can rest here for now." Harbor looked up at him briefly. The movement of his eyes was deliberate, measured. He made no sound. He simply continued forward at a slow, careful pace, exploring the hallway. Each step revealed more of his exhaustion, his limp pulling slightly, his breath shallow. The living room opened wide to the right. It held a simple layout, a dark green couch, a coffee table scratched at the edges, a floor lamp with a crooked shade, and a shelf of old nautical books lining the wall. The fireplace, cold since the previous night, showed a few charred pieces of wood, but nothing burning. Elias crossed the room, knelt beside the hearth, and began stacking kindling with practiced movements. His hands, though rough with age, remained steady. As Elias worked, Harbor wandered only a few feet before lowering himself near the edge of the rug. He rested heavily on his haunches, not fully lying down, but close, testing the space, testing the man. The dog watched every flicker of Elias's hands while the wind pushed against the windows outside. Elias struck a match and ignited the kindling. Flames rose slowly, casting a warm glow across the room. When he turned back toward Harbor, he found the dog already shifting closer, drawn by instinct toward heat. "You're soaked," Elias murmured. "Let's fix that." He walked into the small laundry room and returned with a thick, navy blue towel. Harbor stiffened when Elias approached, but he didn't retreat. Elias knelt again, holding the towel open without making contact. "It's all right. Just drying you off." When Harbor didn't pull away, Elias gently touched the towel to the dog's back, pressing lightly and moving carefully along his sides. Harbor flinched once, a reflex from old memories rather than present pain, but he stayed still. As Elias dried him, he saw the dog's ribs more clearly, the scars on his flank, the thinning fur around his leg joints. Whoever Harbor had been in the past, he had endured more than most creatures should. "You've worked hard in your life," Elias said softly. The fire crackled behind them, adding warmth to the space. Harbor's breaths deepened as his body adjusted. When Elias finished, he tossed the towel into the hamper and sat cross-legged on the rug, a safe distance away. They stayed like that for several minutes, quiet, watchful. The storm continued outside, but inside the only sound was the fire and the soft rhythm of Harbor settling against the rug. A sudden knock at the door broke the moment. Elias rose carefully. "Stay here," he told Harbor, though he wasn't sure the dog would obey. He stepped to the entryway and opened the door a crack. Standing on the porch, soaked beneath a red rain poncho, was a woman Elias recognized but rarely spoke to. Margaret Rowe, a retired schoolteacher in her late 60s. Margaret was tall, with a posture that remained straight despite her age. Her gray hair was pinned neatly under her hood, and her sharp eyes, light blue and steady, were the kind that missed nothing. She lived 2 houses down and had a reputation for being direct but kind. "Elias," she said, pushing back her hood, "I saw you crossing the street earlier with something following you. Thought I'd check in." Elias hesitated. Margaret was not a gossip, but she was observant. He stepped aside so she could see into the living room. Harbor lifted his head at the new voice, alert but not frightened. "A dog?" she asked, brows raising. "Just keeping him out of the rain." Elias kept his voice calm, casual. Margaret studied Harbor for a lengthy moment. "He looks old and starved. Some dogs come through town now and then, but none like him." She paused, softening her voice. "You always had a soft spot for strays." Elias blinked at that. "I never had a dog." "No," Margaret said gently. "But you understand loneliness when you see it." The words hit deeper than he expected. Elias cleared his throat. "He won't be a problem." "I didn't say he would be," she offered a slanted smile. "I brought something for dinner. Thought maybe you'd want it. Looks like you have company after all." She handed him a container covered with foil. The warmth of it seeped through. "Chicken stew," she said. "Real food. And maybe give some to the dog if he can handle it." "That's very kind," Elias replied, struck by the gesture. Margaret nodded once. "Keep him warm tonight. Storm's getting worse." She stepped back into the rain. "And Elias, I'm glad to see you opening that door again." Before he could respond, she was already walking down the steps, her red poncho disappearing into the gray. Elias closed the door and carried the stew to the kitchen. Harbor had risen slightly, watching him. "You must think this place is strange," Elias said, setting the container down. "I do too, sometimes." He filled a bowl with warm water and placed it near the fireplace. Harbor approached slowly, then drank with long, steady pulls. Elias prepared a small portion of stew, careful to remove bones and spices unsuitable for a dog, and set it beside the water. Harbor hesitated only briefly before eating. As he watched the dog eat, Elias felt an unexpected tightening in his chest, something that sat between responsibility and something long dormant, something like purpose. When Harbor finished, he circled once on the rug and lay down fully, his body relaxing in a way it hadn't since arriving in Maplewood. Elias turned off the overhead lights, leaving only the fire to illuminate the room. He sat on the couch, hands clasped, listening to the dog's steady breathing. Hours passed quietly. The storm eased, replaced by a steady drizzle. Elias remained awake, though his body begged for sleep. Watching Harbor rest near the fire reminded him of nights aboard ships. Nights when he stood watch, keeping an eye on systems, on waves, on anything that might change course unexpectedly. Old habits resurfaced easily. Eventually, Harbor stirred. He did not seem frightened, only uncomfortable. He shifted his weight, stretched cautiously, and looked toward Elias as if checking whether the man was still there. "I'm not going anywhere," Elias said softly. Harbor lowered his head again. It wasn't trust yet, not fully. But it was something close, fragile as the last ember in a long, dark night. By the time the flames dimmed to a warm glow and Elias finally allowed himself to lie back, something unspoken had settled between them. A small, steady understanding that both had lost more than they cared to admit, but neither had to face the night alone. Morning came slowly to Maplewood, spreading across the sky in muted shades of silver and cold blue. The storm had passed, leaving behind slick streets and a chill that settled into the bones of the town. Fog crawled low over the rooftops, clinging to the edges of windows and drifting between chimney tops like a creature reluctant to leave. Inside number 43, the fire had burned down to faint embers, but warmth still lingered. Elias Monroe woke in the armchair, a thin blanket draped across his lap. He hadn't meant to fall asleep there, but exhaustion had pulled him under. His neck ached when he shifted, and he rubbed the stiffness away before looking toward the rug. Harbor was still asleep near the hearth, curled into himself with his nose tucked beneath his tail. His breathing was deep, steady, and for the first time since Elias had seen him, peaceful. The sight brought an unexpected sense of calm to Elias. He stretched, rose slowly, and stepped into the kitchen. The house creaked at his movement, the familiar reassuring sounds of old floorboards and pipes adjusting to morning temperatures. He set a kettle on the stove, then rummaged through the pantry for oatmeal. As he filled a pot with water, a light scraping sound reached him from the living room. Elias turned. Harbor was awake now, lifting his head cautiously. His eyes, dark, reflective, tired, tracked Elias's movements with quiet attentiveness. The dog did not attempt to stand yet. He seemed to be measuring the room, confirming that the calmness from the night before still existed. "You hungry?" Elias asked, keeping his tone low and even. Harbor blinked, but did not move. Elias took that as encouragement. He prepared a small portion of oatmeal, mixing in bits of plain boiled chicken from the night before. It wasn't fancy, but it was soft and nourishing, something a worn-down body could handle. He set the bowl near Harbor, then stepped away to give space. Harbor approached slowly, sniffed the food, then began to eat in careful, controlled bites. Watching him, Elias felt something tighten in his chest again, part sympathy, part something he wasn't ready to name. While Harbor ate, Elias opened the curtains, letting the gray morning light spill across the room. The house felt different already, less empty than the day before. A knock sounded at the door. Elias frowned. Visitors were rare. He approached the door cautiously, glancing back to ensure Harbor wasn't alarmed, then opened it part way. A man stood on the porch, adjusting a dark knit beanie on his head. He was in his mid-30s, tall and lean, with a wiry strength beneath a heavy work jacket. His beard was neatly trimmed along a strong jawline, giving him a clean but rugged appearance. His eyes, hazel-tinted with green, held an alertness that seemed habitual. A messenger bag rested across his torso. "Morning," the man said with a small nod. "You must be Elias Monroe. I'm Dr. Samuel Reed, the new veterinarian in town." Elias paused, surprised. He had heard rumors about a new vet taking over the small clinic on Cedar Bluff Road, but he hadn't expected him to show up unannounced. "Morning," Elias replied. "What brings you here?" Samuel offered a faint smile. "Margaret Rowe. She stopped by the clinic early to drop off supplies for the shelter animals and mentioned you had a dog staying with you, an older dog. She thought I might want to check in." Elias exhaled softly. Margaret meant well, but she had a way of turning observations into actions before others could react. Still, Samuel seemed earnest enough. Before responding, Elias opened the door wider. "Come in." Samuel stepped inside, wiping his boots on the entry mat. He scanned the house subtly, an instinct of someone accustomed to working in unfamiliar environments. His eyes settled on Harbor, who had stopped eating and was watching him with cautious tension. "That him?" Samuel asked quietly. "Yes." Elias crossed his arms but kept his tone neutral. "Found him, or rather, he found me." Samuel crouched, keeping a respectful distance. His movements were calm and measured, as though he understood the difference between gentleness and intrusion. "He's older," Samuel observed, "and looks underweight. Mind if I get closer?" Harbor stiffened. Elias shook his head. "Not yet. He's still figuring things out." Samuel nodded, accepting the boundary without argument. "Fair enough. I won't touch him unless he's ready, but from what I can see, he's dehydrated, possibly arthritic, and definitely exhausted. You're doing him a service letting him stay here." Elias didn't respond immediately. Compliments unsettled him, especially ones he didn't feel he'd earned. "He needed shelter," he finally said. "Still," Samuel continued gently, "not everyone would have opened their door." As Samuel stood, Harbor rose shakily. His tail remained low, but he stepped forward 2 careful steps, lowering his head to sniff the air near Samuel's hand. The vet froze, letting the dog decide the distance. Harbor sniffed once, seemed reassured, then stepped back. "That's a good sign," Samuel said with a small smile. "He's not shutting down." Elias felt a flicker of something like relief. "He's been through a lot." "Looks like it," Samuel agreed. He pulled a small card from his pocket and handed it to Elias. "If you ever want me to take a closer look at him, bring him in. Or call me and I'll come here. Don't worry about the cost. We have a fund for strays and rescues." Elias took the card, turning it over in his fingers. "I appreciate it." Samuel nodded once, zipped his jacket, and stepped toward the door. "Take care of him. He's hanging on, but he needs rest and consistency." As Elias opened the door for him, Samuel paused and added, "And take care of yourself too. Sometimes helping a wounded animal is how people start helping themselves. Elias didn't respond, but Samuel didn't expect him to. He simply nodded again and walked back into the fog. Inside, Harbor had returned to the rug, lowering himself with a soft grunt. Elias watched him for a moment, then tucked Samuel's card into his pocket. The rest of the morning unfolded quietly. Elias sorted through his garage tools, rearranging shelves he hadn't touched in months. Harbor followed him occasionally, observing but never interfering. At one point, Elias found an old blanket, one Nadine used to bring on boat trips. He paused, fingers tracing the faded navy pattern, before carrying it inside and placing it near the fireplace. Harbor approached the blanket, sniffed, then circled twice before settling onto it, as if recognizing comfort. "You picked the good one," Elias said softly. "She would have liked you." Outside, fog curled into tendrils, sliding across Maplewood Street. The town remained quiet, unaware of the small shift inside the blue house at number 43. But Elias felt it, the fragile beginning of something different. He had spent years living in muted tones, letting days pass like indistinguishable waves. But now, in the simple presence of a tired old dog sleeping on his wife's favorite blanket, the silence of the house felt less like emptiness and more like recovery. When afternoon arrived, Elias brewed tea, sat in the armchair, and watched the slow rise and fall of Harbor's chest. The dog slept deeply, trusting the quiet around him, and for the first time in years, Elias felt that quiet steady his own heart. For the next 2 days, Maplewood settled into an uneasy calm. The storm clouds had drifted out to sea, leaving a pale sky in their place, a thin wash of winter sunlight that brightened the rooftops but carried little warmth. The quiet suited the town. It suited Elias Monroe as well. Life inside number 43 had taken on a rhythm he didn't expect but didn't resist. He cooked simple meals, repaired things around the house, and spoke a few words aloud each day. Not because anyone demanded conversation, but because the presence of another living being made silence feel less like emptiness and more like choice. Harbor, though exhausted, grew a little stronger. He followed Elias from room to room, never close enough to touch unless Elias made the first move, but near enough that Elias could hear the slow scrape of his claws on the wood floor. Small improvements showed in the way the dog lifted his head more sharply at unfamiliar noises, the steadier way he balanced when standing, the soft tail movement, barely noticeable at first, whenever Elias placed fresh water beside him. Despite this progress, Elias noticed small signs that troubled him. Sometimes, Harbor jolted awake from sleep, springing to his elbows with a harsh, silent intensity. Sometimes he froze at certain sounds, metal clinking, a car backfiring in the distance, even the kettle popping on the stove. Once, when Elias accidentally dropped a screwdriver in the garage, Harbor retreated into the hallway, body rigid, eyes locked on Elias as if preparing for discipline. It took several minutes for him to return. On the third morning, as Elias loaded firewood into the indoor bin, he decided that Harbor needed something more structured, something beyond quiet rest and oatmeal. He remembered Samuel Reed's surety tucked into his coat pocket. The suggestion the veterinarian had offered, rest, consistency, had settled into Elias's mind, but so had something else Samuel said. He's hanging on, but he needs more than luck. Elias set the last piece of wood down and looked at Harbor, who lay on the rug watching him. "We should get you checked properly," Elias said. "Make sure nothing else is wrong." Harbor blinked, head tilting slightly, as though weighing the unfamiliar word. Checked. A car engine rumbled outside, an older model pickup with a low growl. Elias reached the window and peered out. A man stepped out of the truck, pulling off a black beanie and tucking it into his jacket pocket. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and built like someone accustomed to manual labor. His beard was thick, more salt than pepper, running along a strong jawline etched with deep lines. His eyes were dark, decisive, and carried the seriousness of someone who didn't waste words. Elias recognized him instantly. Deputy Martin Hale, one of Maplewood's few law enforcement officers. Martin was in his early 50s, but moved with the steadiness of a man who'd learned to conserve energy rather than rush. People described him as fair but blunt, a man shaped by 25 years of navigating small-town disputes and the occasional real trouble with the same level-headed patience. His uniform jacket fit tightly across his shoulders, and his boots looked perpetually polished, even in the rain. A knock sounded at the door a moment later. Elias opened it halfway. "Morning, Martin," Elias. Martin nodded. His gaze shifted past Elias, noticing the movement of Harbor's head inside. Heard something about a dog staying with you. Thought I'd come to take a look. Elias bristled slightly. He's harmless. I'm not here to cause trouble, Martin said in his flat, steady voice. But a few folks on Maplewood Street called in about a large stray wandering around last week. Procedurally, I have to make sure everything's safe. He's not wandering anymore. He's with me. At that, Martin raised an eyebrow. Not judgmental, just measuring. You planning to keep him? Elias opened the door a little wider, allowing Harbor a clearer view. The dog stared back, ears twitching, wary but not aggressive. He needed help, Elias answered simply. Martin exhaled, crossing his arms. Well, if he's with you, that's different. But I need to know if he's tagged, microchipped, anything like that. Could belong to someone. He's chipped, Elias said. At least I think so. There's a scar on his neck. Samuel Reed came by. He said Harbor might be military. That caught Martin's attention. His eyes sharpened. Military dog? That complicates things. How? Martin stepped inside without waiting for permission, his boots leaving faint wet marks on the floor. He stopped near Harbor, crouching in a controlled way that kept his balance steady. Harbor stiffened, but didn't retreat. He only watched. Martin studied the dog's face carefully. Older shepherd, strong build, scarring on the flank, ears cropped by impact, not accident. His voice was low, analytical. Looks like the canine units I used to train with when I worked in Washington County. You trained with them? Elias asked. Martin nodded. Before I moved here, yeah. Good dogs, tough work, and they don't get old gently. He extended a hand toward Harbor, not close enough to touch, just within the dog's awareness. Harbor sniffed faintly, then settled again. Martin stood. He'll need medical care, and if he really is a discharged K9, someone will come looking. The military treats their equipment. He stopped, corrected himself. They treat their dogs differently now, but paperwork tends to lag. Could be he slipped out of a system. He didn't slip out, Elias said quietly. He was dumped. Someone took him off base and abandoned him. Martin's jaw tightened. You sure? Yes. The two men held each other's gaze for a long moment. Finally, Martin sighed. All right. Then until we know more, he stays here. Elias felt the tension ease slightly. Thank you. But, Martin added, keep an eye out. Dogs like him don't end up abandoned without a story trailing behind them. Could be nothing. Could be someone trying to hide something. Elias frowned. What are you suggesting? Just be cautious. Martin pulled a notepad from his jacket and scribbled a number. If you see unfamiliar vehicles on this street, or anyone asking questions about a dog fitting his description, call me. Before Elias could respond, Martin tore the sheet and handed it over. Better to be careful than sorry. He stepped toward the door. Harbor watched him the entire time, unmoving. As Martin stepped outside, he paused and said, And Elias, I'm glad you took him in. It's good to see your porch light on again. Elias said nothing, but his focus remained fixed on the scrap of paper in his hand, long after Martin left. Later that afternoon, Elias prepared to take Harbor to Samuel Reed's clinic. The sky had shifted again, clouds gathering in thick layers over the distant treetops. Elias placed a blanket in the passenger side of his truck to cushion Harbor's joints. Getting him inside took patience. Harbor hesitated, eyeing the truck not with fear, but recognition, an old memory brushing against the present. Elias kept his voice soft. It's different now. Come on. After a few long moments, Harbor placed his front paws on the step, then carefully lifted himself onto the seat. Elias shut the door gently. As they drove toward Cedar Bluff Road, Maplewood slid past, the grocery store with its fogged front windows, the hardware shop where men in flannel jackets talked over morning coffee, the school parking lot dotted with bikes locked against railings. Harbor watched everything, ears twitching with each new sound. At the clinic, Samuel greeted them at the entrance, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing strong forearms marked with faint scars from past rescues. His smile remained calm but steady. You made it, Samuel said, stepping back so Elias and Harbor could enter. The clinic interior smelled of antiseptic and cedar bedding. Soft lights illuminated a small waiting area with framed photos of local pets pinned on the wall. A receptionist sat behind the desk, Diana Mosley, a thin woman in her early 40s with short auburn hair, freckles across her cheeks, and a gentle, steadying smile. She nodded to Elias, her voice warm. "Good to see you. And this must be Harbor." Samuel led them into an exam room. Harbor tensed but did not resist as Samuel assessed him, checking joints, vision, weight, heart rhythm. "He's got arthritis, dehydration, and mild muscle atrophy," Samuel explained. "But nothing irreversible. His spirit's intact. That counts for more than people think." Harbor met Elias's gaze as if waiting for confirmation. "You're going to be all right," Elias said. And for the first time, Harbor's tail moved, not much, just a faint sweep across the table, but enough to change something in the room's air. By the time they left the clinic, the clouds had darkened, but the weight on Elias's chest felt lighter. Harbor stood a bit straighter. The road home looked less like a path back to loneliness and more like the beginning of something steady. The drive back from the clinic felt longer than the drive there. The sky over Maplewood had begun gathering new layers of cloud, thick steel-gray masses that hinted at more rain to come. The truck's windshield wipers swept back and forth with a steady mechanical rhythm, and Harbor watched them move as though trying to understand their purpose. Every few minutes he shifted, careful of his joints, and laid his head on the edge of the blanket Elias had placed beneath him. Elias glanced over occasionally, noting the dog's breathing, the calmer set of his shoulders. The visit to the clinic had taken something out of Harbor, but it had restored something too. When they reached number 43, Elias parked and helped Harbor out of the truck. The dog stepped cautiously onto the pavement, his paws making soft taps against the wet ground. He paused to survey the street, as though mapping it, memorizing the angles of houses, the corners where shadows collected, the faint sounds of the neighborhood. His alertness wasn't anxiety, it was habit. Inside the house, Elias dried Harbor with a towel and placed a warm cushion near the fireplace. Harbor settled onto it with a slow exhale, his eyes half closed but still aware of every movement in the room. Elias walked into the kitchen, filled a pot with water, and set it on the stove. He found himself humming without realizing it, a gentle, unfamiliar tune that rose from memory rather than intention. He hadn't hummed anything in years, not since the accident. As he prepared tea, a motion outside the window caught his attention. A truck, older, white, muddied with road dust, rolled slowly down Maplewood Street. It didn't match any of the neighbors' vehicles. The truck moved slower than normal traffic, its speed almost curious. Elias stepped closer to the window. The truck reached the end of the street, paused as if hesitating, then turned around and crawled past again. This time, the driver seemed to glance toward Elias's house. Elias's jaw tightened. He stayed still until the truck disappeared around the bend. When he returned to the living room, Harbor was awake, staring toward the same window with ears alert. "You saw it too," Elias murmured. The dog blinked once, then lowered his head, but didn't let himself relax fully. Elias took his tea to the armchair and sat down, letting the warmth of the mug seep into his hands. His thoughts were restless. Martin Hale's warning echoed faintly. "If you see unfamiliar vehicles, call me." He reached for his phone, hesitated, then set it aside. One truck on a public street wasn't enough to jump to conclusions. The afternoon unfolded quietly. Harbor napped, rising only to drink water or shift his weight. Elias rechecked the blanket for Harbor's comfort, then tackled small chores, tightening a loose hinge on a cabinet, sanding a groove in a table leg, wiping down the kitchen counter. These were simple tasks, but they steadied him. Around 4, someone knocked on the door. Elias froze. The knock repeated, light and rhythmic. Not urgent, just present. Elias opened the door a crack. Lila Pena stood on the porch, backpack slung over one shoulder, curls frizzy from the damp air. She looked younger in the afternoon light, still just a teenager, but with a confidence that rarely wavered. "Hi, Mr. Monroe," she said with a small grin. "I brought something for the dog." In her hands, she held a plastic container filled with leftover chicken and rice. "My grandma made too much," she explained, "and I told her about the dog. She said he could use some home cooking." Elias opened the door wider. "Come in, just for a moment." Lila stepped inside, wiping her shoes on the mat. Her eyes lit up when she saw Harbor, who was watching her carefully, but without hostility. "He looks better," Lila whispered, "not as sad." "He's getting there." Elias accepted the container. "Thank your grandmother." "Sure." She slowly extended her hand toward Harbor, stopping several inches short. "Can I?" "Let him smell you first." Harbor lifted his head, sniffed gently, then looked away. Not avoidance, but acceptance. "He likes you," Elias said. Lila smiled. "I like him too." She turned toward the window, then frowned. "Was that white truck here earlier? I saw it parked by the mailboxes after school. I thought maybe someone new moved in." Elias kept his voice even. "Don't know yet. It looked weird," she added, like the driver kept stopping to check something. "You sure?" She nodded. "Yeah, and he had something in the front seat, a clipboard or binder." Elias felt the muscles in his shoulders tighten. "Let me know if you see it again." Lila agreed, then said goodbye and jogged back down the steps, the bounce in her stride returning as she disappeared down Maplewood Street. When Elias closed the door, Harbor was looking directly at him, ears stiff, body alert. "You're right," Elias muttered. "Something's off." He set the leftover chicken and rice aside for later, then reached for the card Samuel had given him. He dialed the clinic. The receptionist, Diana Mosley, answered. "Cedar Bluff Veterinary Clinic, this is Diana." "Hi, Diana, it's Elias Monroe." "Oh, hello, Mr. Monroe. Did something happen with Harbor?" "He's fine," Elias said. "But I have a question. You mentioned earlier that you would check any military chip records if we brought him in again." "Yes," Diana replied quickly. "We log them into a national system." "Why?" "I need to know if anyone has flagged him as missing, or if his record shows anything unusual." Diana paused, typing in the background. "Hold on. Let me check." The seconds stretched long. Harbor shifted, sensing the tension. Finally, Diana returned. "There's no active missing report, but there is something odd." "What is it?" "The system has him listed as decommissioned 3 months ago, but the note on his discharge is blank. That never happens. Military dogs always get a transfer statement. This one just ends." Elias felt a breath leave him. "And there's another thing," Diana continued. "Someone tried accessing his record last night, around midnight. They didn't change anything, but they opened the file." "From where?" "IP location says somewhere near Portland. That's all I can see." Elias thanked her and hung up, sinking into the armchair. Harbor walked closer and rested his head on Elias's knee. The dog's weight was warm, grounding. Elias scratched behind Harbor's ear. "Someone's looking for you," he whispered, "but not the right someone." Night settled early. The sky dimmed to a deep blue-gray, and the first drops of rain began tapping softly against the windows. Elias checked the locks twice, then drew the curtains closed. Harbor stayed close to him as he moved from room to room. Around 8, a sharp crack echoed outside, like a car door slamming. Harbor stiffened immediately, muscles locking as he stared at the front door. Elias stepped toward the window and peeked through a narrow gap in the curtain. The white truck was back. It idled near the mailboxes, headlights off. The silhouette of the driver sat motionless. Elias gripped the curtain tightly, resisting the urge to flip on the porch light. After several still moments, the truck pulled away slowly, disappearing around the bend, just as quietly as it had arrived. Harbor's tail lowered, his stance rigid. "You're all right," Elias said gently. "We're both all right." But even as he said it, he felt the truth. This was no coincidence. Something from Harbor's past was inching its way toward Maplewood, and whether Elias liked it or not, he had just placed himself in its path. When he finally sat down again, Harbor lay beside the armchair, resting his chin on Elias's boot. For a long time, Elias watched the rain blur the window glass, listening to the slow, steady breaths of the dog at his feet. And for the first time since the accident, Elias felt not just protective, but protected. The next morning arrived with a colder edge, the kind that settled in the wooden beams of houses and lingered long after sunrise. Maplewood Street looked deceptively peaceful. Thin sunlight cut through breaks in the clouds, and puddles left by last night's rain reflected patches of blue sky like pieces of broken glass. But inside number 43, the tension remained. Harbor had slept close to Elias's bed, waking several times during the night, ears stiff at every bark in the distance, every distant vehicle, every shifting shadow cast by the porch light. Elias Monroe rose early, moving slowly to avoid disturbing Harbor. He brewed coffee and stood by the kitchen window, staring out at the street, as though expecting the white truck to roll past again. But Maplewood was quiet. A jogger, Tommy Briggs, a man in his early 40s with a thick runner's beard and the kind of broad, cheerful posture only regular exercise could carve, passed by with a wave. He wore bright blue thermal gear and wireless earphones bouncing lightly with each stride. His personality was friendly, a little loud, but genuine. He often greeted neighbors whether they responded or not. Elias lifted a hand in acknowledgement. Tommy slowed slightly, pointing toward the house. "Saw some lights on late last night. Everything okay over here?" His voice carried easily, warm and good-natured. "Yeah," Elias answered. "Just a restless night." Tommy nodded, wiping rain from his beard. "Storms make everything creepier. Let me know if you need help with anything." He resumed his run, humming along to whatever played through his headphones. Harbor approached the window, head lowered, observing the jogger disappear around the corner. Elias brushed a hand along the dog's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the thinning fur. "Let's get you outside for a bit," he murmured. He clipped a soft rope lead, borrowed from an old storage box, onto Harbor's collar. They stepped onto the porch, breathing in the crisp air. Harbor sniffed the ground, taking slow steps, cautious but eager to stretch his legs. His limp was lighter today, though still present. The scars across his flank tightened slightly with each shift of weight. They walked down Maplewood Street. The grass along the sidewalks sparkled with dew, and the occasional car passed with a hiss of wet tires. Harbor paused at nearly every corner, studying the scents with a seriousness that reminded Elias of Samuel Reed's words, "His spirit's intact." Elias wondered how many years that spirit had served others before it was thrown aside. As they approached the mailbox cluster, Harbor suddenly froze. His ears pointed forward, nostrils flaring sharply. Elias followed his gaze. Tire tracks cut into the mud near the curb. Fresh, still sharp-edged. Not from last night, from this morning. Elias crouched to examine them. The tread pattern was heavy, thick, and the spacing matched the truck they had seen. Harbor growled low, a deep, sound rumbling from his chest. Not hostile, but alert. "We'll let Martin know," Elias said quietly. They finished the walk and returned home. As they stepped inside, Harbor suddenly stopped dead at the threshold. His head jerked slightly to the left, eyes fixed on the ground near the doorframe. Elias bent down. Something small was wedged against the wood, a piece of laminated paper, a field card, the kind used in military operations. Elias felt his pulse tighten as he picked it up. The card was damp but intact, beige with faded black print. At the top, a unit code was stamped, followed by the designation, Canine Support Decommission. Beneath it was a handwritten note in scrawled ink. "Heard you found him. We need to talk." No name, no contact, just a symbol in the bottom corner, a triangular mark with 3 slashes. Elias recognized nothing about it, but Harbor reacted instantly. The dog stepped forward, sniffed the card, and whined in a low, uneasy tone. Whatever this card represented, Harbor knew it too well. Elias slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Someone was here," he whispered. Before he could contemplate further, his phone buzzed. The screen displayed a number not saved in his contacts. Samuel Reed. He answered. "Elias." Samuel's voice came through affected by urgency, though kept controlled the way medical professionals often spoke in stressful situations. "I didn't want to alarm you earlier," he said, "but something strange happened. After you left the clinic yesterday, someone called asking for records on a German Shepherd. Male, elderly, faded coat. They didn't give a name, and when I asked who they were, they hung up." Elias gripped the phone more tightly. "Did they say anything else?" "No, but they kept breathing on the line, like they expected me to recognize them." Samuel paused. "I think someone's tracking him, Elias, and not in a friendly way." Harbor lifted his head, watching Elias closely. Elias exhaled slowly. "I found something at my door this morning, a military field card." Samuel's tone sharpened. "What did it say?" "That we need to talk." Samuel swore softly under his breath. "Do not ignore that. Whoever left it knows where you live. They know Harbor's with you, and they didn't leave that lightly." Elias felt the weight of the house around him, the quietness, the isolation, the vulnerability. "What do you suggest?" "First, don't panic. Second, call Deputy Hale. He knows the town, and he has protocols for this kind of situation. And Elias, lock your doors." The call ended. Elias lowered the phone, feeling the air shift around him. Harbor pressed his muzzle against Elias's leg, sensing the tension. "You're safe," Elias repeated, though the words felt thinner than before. "We're both safe." The kettle whistled faintly from the kitchen. Elias shut it off, unable to focus on tea. Instead, He paced the living room once, then twice, trying to think through the fragments of information. A suspicious vehicle, a military record with no discharge summary, someone accessing files from Portland, and now a field card left on his doorstep. He reached for the phone again. "Maplewood Sheriff's Office," came the voice of the dispatcher. A man in his late 20s named Oliver Crane, who had an easygoing nature but a deep concern for doing things right. Oliver had a round face, a trimmed blonde beard, and the kind of politeness that never felt forced. "Oliver, this is Elias Monroe. I need to speak with Deputy Hale." "Of course, Mr. Monroe. He's on patrol but should be close. Want me to send him over?" "Yes. Tell him it's about the dog." Oliver's tone shifted, becoming more focused. "Understood. He'll be there shortly." Elias hung up and sat near Harbor, resting one hand lightly on the dog's shoulder. Harbor leaned into the touch, a sign of trust that Elias didn't take lightly. 10 minutes later, the crunch of boots sounded on the porch. Elias opened the door before the knock came. Martin Hale stood there, hat low, jacket zipped tight. His beard glistened faintly with moisture from the fog. His expression was firm, but not unfriendly. "Oliver said you had something important," Martin said, stepping inside. Elias handed him the field card. Martin studied it with narrowed eyes. "This is a restricted document, not classified, but not something civilians should be seeing. Whoever left this wants you to know they're connected to his past." "I figured as much." "Do you recognize the symbol?" Martin asked. "No." "I do," Martin said grimly. "That's the mark of a private contractor group, small, specialized, not exactly official. They used to partner with certain military units before regulations tightened. They don't follow standard rules, and they don't like having loose ends." Harbor growled softly. Martin crouched beside him. If Harbor was in their possession, or under their command, they may see him as property, not as a veteran, not as a creature with rights. Elias's fists tightened. "He's not property." "I know," Martin's voice softened. "The question is whether they believe that." The deputy stood and scanned the room, as though checking exits and sightlines. "I'll look into this symbol, but until then, tighten your security, and don't leave Harbor alone." Elias nodded. "And Elias," Martin added, "if they come back, don't try to confront them yourself." When Martin left, silence fell again, but not the comforting kind that had grown between Elias and Harbor. This was a tense, waiting silence. Elias locked the door, lowered the blinds, and knelt beside Harbor. "We'll get through this," he whispered. Harbor rested his head in Elias's hands. Outside, the clouds thickened again, drawing Maplewood into another quiet storm. One not made of weather, but of the past finally, catching up. The next 2 days slid by under a veil of unsettled weather. Maplewood rarely stayed quiet for long, but a strange stillness gripped the neighborhood now, like the town itself sensed that something was shifting beneath the surface. Clouds hung low and heavy, threatening rain but never fully committing. The light was pale, diluted, the kind that softened edges and made everything appear one shade duller. Inside number 43, Elias Monroe monitored the world with a new vigilance. He kept curtains angled so he could see the street without being seen. He checked locks twice before dusk. Harbor shadowed him from room to room, no longer just for comfort, but for awareness. The old shepherd seemed to understand that the house was under a quiet watch. On the morning of the third day, Elias decided they needed fresh air, even if only in small doses. He clipped the rope lead onto Harbor's collar and stepped outside. The neighborhood showed its usual early activity. Tommy Briggs jogging by with fogged sunglasses, a mother loading 2 kids into a minivan, a delivery truck rolling slowly down Spruce Avenue. Nothing threatening, nothing unusual. Yet, Harbor paused at every sound. The dog's ears flicked like satellite dishes recalibrating. His instincts ran deeper than memory. They walked the perimeter of the block. Elias noted that the tire tracks from earlier rains had been washed into muddy streaks. That was good. If someone was watching, they would need to make fresh passes to keep track. Harbor sniffed an area near the curb, then stiffened. Elias followed his gaze. A scrap of black fabric fluttered lightly against the base of a lamppost. Elias approached carefully and lifted it. It was a torn piece of nylon strap, frayed at the ends, stained with something like grease. Harbor sniffed it once, then backed away, whining softly in his throat. Another trace, another breadcrumb. Elias pocketed it. They returned home. Shortly after noon, someone knocked. 3 even taps, firm but not aggressive. Elias opened the door with caution. Standing outside was a young man in his late 20s wearing a postal uniform. His name tag read Kevin Lorne. He was tall and thin, with sandy blonde hair tucked neatly under his cap. His face was angular, with a straight nose and tired blue eyes that hinted he didn't sleep much. Despite that, he carried a polite demeanor, the kind built through years of customer interactions. A faint shadow of stubble lined his jaw, more from a rushed morning than any attempt at style. "Package for you, Mr. Monroe," Kevin said, adjusting his satchel. "Small envelope, no return address." Elias frowned. "No return?" "No, sir. Drop shipment, paid in cash." Kevin scratched the back of his neck, his expression shifting into mild unease. "Honestly, something about the sender felt off. Didn't say anything, just handed me the envelope and walked off." "You saw the sender?" Kevin nodded. "Briefly. Man in a brown jacket, hood, up. Taller than me. Didn't look at me the whole time." Elias nodded and accepted the envelope. "Thanks, Kevin." "Yeah, sure. Be careful with it," Kevin added, his tone unsure. Just felt strange. When Kevin left, Elias locked the door and set the envelope on the table. Harbor paste, ears forward. Elias opened it carefully with a knife. Inside was a single photograph. Elias's stomach tightened. The photograph showed Harbor, years younger, fur darker, posture rigid. He wore a tactical harness. The background appeared to be a training yard, the kind fenced with chain link and lined with impact dummies. Harbor looked stronger, sharper, eyes alive with intense focus. But that wasn't what made Elias's pulse quicken. In the corner of the photo stood two men in military fatigues. Their faces were partially visible. One was broad-shouldered with a square jaw and graying stubble. The other was leaner with a severe haircut and a scar running from eyebrow to cheek. A deep, jagged line that gave his face a permanent expression of restrained anger. Beneath the photo, written in print, "He was ours. You don't know what you're keeping." Elias inhaled slowly. Harbor approached, sniffing the picture, then looking at Elias with wide, uneasy eyes. "I'm not giving you up," Elias whispered. He placed the photo back in the envelope and tucked it into a drawer. The air felt heavier now. This wasn't just tracking. This was messaging. Around 2 p.m., needing clarity, Elias drove Harbor to Cedar Bluff Road. The veterinary clinic was quiet today, the parking lot speckled with puddles. Inside, the lights glowed warm against the gray afternoon. Diana Mosley greeted them with a smile and a thermos of chamomile tea. "Rough morning?" "Something like that," Elias said. "Samuel's in exam 2. Go right in." Samuel Reed looked up from his desk as they entered. He wore a forest green flannel shirt rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms lightly dusted with hair and marked with faint scars, evidence of years working with frightened animals and unpredictable rescues. His beard was trimmed closer today, showing more definition in his jawline. His expression sharpened when he saw Elias. Something happened. Elias handed him the envelope. Samuel removed the photo carefully, his brows knitted. "These men look like contractors. The scarred one. I've seen him in old case files." He continued studying the picture. "This confirms your suspicion. Harbor wasn't just a military dog. He was part of a specialized handler unit. These dogs weren't retired. They were reassigned, quietly." "Reassigned for what?" Elias asked. Samuel sighed. "For off-record operations. Ones the government didn't want tied back officially. Dogs like Harbor weren't supposed to get old, and they definitely weren't supposed to show up in small towns." Harbor rested his head against Samuel's leg, seeking assurance. Samuel stroked his ear gently. "You didn't deserve any of this, old boy." A bell chimed up front. Diana's voice drifted down the hall. "Samuel, there's someone here asking for you." Samuel exchanged a look with Elias. "Stay here." Minutes passed. Harbor paced, sensing tension. Then Samuel appeared in the doorway, pale, tight-jawed. "Elias," he whispered, "you need to go. Now." "What happened?" Samuel glanced over his shoulder. Two men walked in. One matches the description on that photo. They asked if a dog named Harbor had been logged recently. Elias felt a cold rush down his spine. "Did they see us arrive?" "No. I told Diana to send them to the supply room while I checked records. But they won't stay distracted long." Harbor let out a low rumble. Elias stood. "We'll go out the back." Samuel nodded. "I'll cover your exit." He led them through a narrow hallway lined with bags of animal feed, then toward a back door with a rusted handle. Before opening it, Samuel turned to Elias. This isn't going to fade on its own. They're invested. If Harbor was part of one of their off-record programs, losing him is more than an inconvenience. It's liability. Meaning they will not stop. Elias gripped the lead more tightly. Then I won't either. Samuel placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. I'm with you, whatever you decide. They slipped out the back door, heading toward the tree line behind the clinic. Elias kept Harbor close, his steps steady despite the adrenaline pressing against his ribs. Behind them, voices rose inside the clinic. One barked an order, boots scraped against tile. They were too close. Elias whispered, "Come on, Harbor." The two disappeared into the cluster of pines behind Cedar Bluff Road, swallowed by the quiet woods as the storm inched closer. In the quiet curve of this story, we are reminded of a truth as old as time itself, that even in the darkest valleys, God sends his small miracles in the most unexpected forms. Sometimes they arrive on four legs, weary and wounded. Sometimes they come in the shape of a human heart, finally brave enough to open again. And often, they appear exactly when we believe we deserve them the least. Harbor's journey was not just the tale of an abandoned dog finding a home. It was the story of grace. Grace that catches us when the world lets us fall. Grace that binds the broken. Grace that brings two lost souls together so they can heal what neither could mend alone. And maybe that is the lesson for all of us. In our everyday lives, in the noise of errands and bills and worries, we forget that God still moves quietly through the corners of our days. He still places the right people, the right moments, the right companions on our path, just when our strength is running out. If you have ever felt discarded like Harbor, or lonely like Elias, may this story whisper to your heart, you are not forgotten. God sees you. God knows your storms. And he will send your miracle, often small, gentle, and fur-covered, but always perfectly timed. Before you go, if this story touched you, inspired you, or warmed something tired inside your spirit, please take a moment to share this video with someone who might need a reminder of hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us, what miracle has God placed in your life? And if you wanted to hear more stories of love, faith, and the incredible bond between people and their animals, don't forget to subscribe and join our growing family. Now, a blessing for you. May God walk beside you through every valley. May he send light into the corners of your life that feel forgotten. May he place loyal hearts around you, both human and animal, so you never journey alone. And may his love, steady and unbreakable, lead you home in each and every day. If you receive this blessing, type Amen in the comments below. God bless you, and thank you for being here with us today.